Good morning, teacher, and good morning, classmates. Today, my partner Luis and I, Alejandra, will talk about a very important topic for the history and the heritage of the English language. And this topic is Chaucer's legacy on language and culture. Okay, first of all, I want to start with an outline. The first thing we're going to talk about today is who was Geoffrey Chaucer. We're going to give a little bit of information about his life. And then we're going to talk about his works. We have selected three of his most important works, so you can know him as a writer and as a poet. And the next thing we're going to talk about is his importance in the Middle English period. And last but not least, we're going to talk about his contribution to the English language and culture. Who was Geoffrey Chaucer? He was born in 1343 in London, and he was a writer during the Middle English period. Being a writer on this period was really hard. Uh, what do I mean by this? As we have studied in class, the English in the Middle English period, there wasn't like an official language. There were two languages, and there was a linguistic class division, and this means that aristocrats spoke in French, and normal people, common people, spoke in English, and there wasn't an official language to write. People used to write in French or in Latin, but they didn't write in English because English was considered a lower language and it wasn't as important as French at that time. So being a writer in this period was really hard. But Chaucer managed to do it, and he managed to elevate English into a more important level at the time. Another thing we have to know about him is that he grew up in a multicultural and a multilingual environment. He probably knew how to write in French and in Latin from a very young age. Other people also say that he knew Italian, and he used all of this knowledge to translate works from these languages to English, and this helped him a lot to be. This was an important factor on his writer career. And he also worked as a diplomat for the royal court, and this helped him to meet new people and be inspired to write. But he actually didn't have a lot of time working on that, so he quit that, so he had more time to write. Now I'm gonna talk about his works. The first work I want to talk about is the Book of the Duchess. This book isn't actually a book, it's a short poem, and it was considered a milestone in the English literature because it wasn't written in French, it was written in English, and it is actually considered the first book written in English. There actually were more books written in English by that time, but this is the most important one. And this is the start of his career. The second book I want to talk about is more important than the other one, is Troilus and Crusade, and is said to be influenced by Italian works. Chaucer was in contact with a lot of Italian people and Italian writers, and this actually was a really important factor on his career because he witnessed the elevation of Italian vernacular to a language of poetry. So he wanted to do the same with English, and he was really inspired at that time. So he wrote Troilus and Crusade with all the experience that he had. And this is considered the first English novel. And he actually made another big change with this book because he gave a voice to a female character that was Crusade. And this is a love story of Troilus and Crusade. And in other books that existed in the time, women didn't have much representation, and books were a little bit misogynistic. So the fact that he gave Crusade a personality and a voice, and he made her as a fearful and sincere character was really new to that time and had an impact on other books. This book is considered the source of the phrase, all good things must come to an end. We all know that phrase, I think. And unlike Shakespeare, Chaucer didn't have a lot of impact on words and phrases, but he really created some important ones, as this one. And this book is considered as an important legacy for other writers, such as Robert Harrison, John Metham, and even Shakespeare. I think we all know Romeo and Juliet. That book was inspired by Troilus and Chrysaid's love story. Okay, the third book I want to talk about is considered his most important book, and it is the Tales of Canterbury. Uh, he was writing this book at a very hectic period of his life because he stopped working on customs and on the royal court, and he moved to Kent. And this actually allowed him to spend more time writing. So that's why this is like the longest poem he has write and the most complete one. And at that time, actually, people didn't read because there weren't enough copies of books. They used to listen to his stories. So at the time that he was writing this book, the printing press came to Britain, and this was a really important change for the English literature. And since this was the first book to be actually printed in the printing press, at the time it was considered the first work to be read rather than listened. Because now that there were a lot of copies of this book, people could actually read and not just listen to someone reading it. And now my partner is going to talk about the importance of Chaucer in the English language and his contribution. Thank you.